McDermott. And in this video, I want to explore the two campaigns that followed immediately after General McClellan's failure to reach Richmond. Recognizing that the Peninsula Campaign had run its course, President Lincoln recalled the Army of the Potomac and combined it with the newly formed General Pope's Army of Virginia to conduct an overwhelming offensive south from Washington. General Lee responded by sending half of his army north under the command of General Jackson to confront the Union forces south of Washington. And he, that is General Lee, remained at Richmond with the other half of his army under the command of General James Longstreet to watch General McClellan's departure from the peninsula. He wanted to ensure that the Federals didn't suddenly reverse their course and take another shot at capturing Richmond. General Lee's plan was for General Jackson to defeat the Federals in the Washington area before the two Union armies could combine. On 9 August, General Jackson's 24,000 men was confronted by General Pope at Cedar Mountain, also known as Cedar Run. The battle was inconclusive, but the Confederates went into defensive positions after losing 1,365 men. Although Union losses totaled almost twice as many, 2,381 men, General Lee recognized that Stonewall Jackson could not beat General Pope by himself. As the Union Army, commanded by General McClellan, departed from the peninsula, General Lee marched his troops north to join Stonewall Jackson. After the Battle of Cedar Mountain, the Union commander, General Pope, initially thought that the rebels were going to move back into the Shenandoah Valley. And then he was rudely surprised when his supply depot at Manassas Junction, some 25 miles behind his right flank, was attacked and destroyed. In fact, General Jackson had marched more than 50 miles in less than 2 days and accomplished a wide-ranging maneuver to appear on the Federals' major line of communications, the Orange and Alexandria Railroad. And once again, Stonewall Jackson was able to surprise the Federals with those rapid, unexpected marches. Jackson's foot cavalry again demonstrated their abilities. While General Jackson threatened the Federal lines of communication, Federal General Pope also saw an opportunity to crush the rebels at Manassas while they were separated from the Confederate Army that was under command of General Lee approaching from Richmond. General Pope concentrated his forces and assaulted General Jackson's position on the morning of 29 August, opening the Battle of Second Manassas, which is also known as the Second Battle of Bull Run. General Lee arrived with General Longstreet's army during the afternoon, and the day's fighting proved initially to be inconclusive. The Federals renewed their attack the following morning and were met by massed Confederate artillery fire, unaware that General Longstreet and Lee had arrived on the battlefield with an additional 25,000 men. A massed Confederate counterattack by General Longstreet's 5 divisions, the largest simultaneous mass assault of the entire Civil War, crushed General Pope's left flank and forced the Federals back to Bull Run. Only an effective rearguard action prevented a repeat of the disastrous first Bull Run battle, and while the action was a Confederate victory, the Federal Army remained intact. Widespread criticism and bitter accusations among Federal leaders soon followed and cost General Pope his command. The Federals suffered 14,500 casualties, and the Confederates had 9,500 men killed, wounded, or captured. But that battle also set the stage for General Lee's first invasion of the North. General Jackson's men had made their 50-mile march to Manassas without supply wagons, and they arrived at that Federal depot with empty bellies. Confederate Lieutenant John Hampton Chamberlain's observations are insightful, and he wrote, "Upon reaching Manassas Junction, we met a Federal brigade, the 1st New Jersey, which had been sent from Alexandria. They were fools enough to send a flag demanding our surrender at once. Of course, we scattered that brigade, killing and wounding many. At the junction was a large depot of stores. Collected in the space of a square mile was an amount and variety of property such as I had never conceived. It was a curious sight to see our ragged and famished men helping themselves to every imaginable luxury or necessity, whether of clothing or of food. For my part, I got a toothbrush, a box of candles, a quantity of lobster salad, a barrel of coffee, and some other things. We could carry little away of these riches, but the men could eat at least one good meal. To see a starving man eating lobster salad and drinking Rhine wine barefoot and in tatters was a curious thing. At nightfall, fire was set to the depot, the warehouses, and loaded trains, several long empty trains as well, and houses, restaurants, everything. A northern soldier, a man named Warren Goss, recorded that during the Battle of the 30th of August, he and his comrades, quote, came upon the rusty remains of guns, bayonets, weather-beaten fragments of gun carriages and equipment, and the bleaching skulls and bones of their comrades who had perished on the field the year before. That would have been First Manassas, or First Bull Run. They were the first sacrifices of the blunders of the war. Major Rufus Dow, serving in the 6th Wisconsin Volunteers, recorded his experience later that evening. And he wrote, regiments moving steadily to the rear, the batteries moved also in retreat. A rebel line in our front rose up from the ground and advanced slowly after us. It was a very strange sight. Our blue line slowly retreating and the long gray line slowly and quietly following. When we halted, the rebels halted and they lay down on the ground. It was growing dark under skies, turning cloudy and beginning to rain. General Philip Kearny came up in the rear of our regiment, which now was positioned near the stone bridge over Bull Run Creek. He informed us that our brigade was to be the rear guard of the Army, which was in full retreat. We had not before suspected the real extent of the disaster. And so ends the Second Battle of Manassas, known to the Federals as the Second Battle of Bull Run. With the conclusion of that battle, the Confederate Army turned its back on the Federals and moved west into the Shenandoah Valley, intending to bring the war to the north. Ordering General Jackson to seize Harper's Ferry, lead elements of the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia, numbering some 55,000 troops, crossed the Potomac River into Maryland on the 3rd of September, 1862. 10 days later, following an initial engagement at South Mountain with General George McClellan's Army of the Potomac, as it was advancing from Washington, the Confederates concentrated on a ridge west of Antietam Creek near the town of Sharpsburg, Maryland. The Northern Army numbered approximately 87,000 men, and it commenced the bloodiest day of the Civil War with an early morning attack on 17 September. General McClellan's plan, in his own words, demonstrates a lack of decision and clarity. His written order included these statements: to make the main attack upon the enemy's left, at least to create a diversion in favor of the main attack, with the hope of something more, by assailing the enemy's right, and as soon as one or both of the flank maneuvers were fully successful, to attack his center with any reserve I might then have available. End quote. Dunker Church, the Bloody Lane, Burnside's Bridge became symbols of the terrible struggle that unfolded during the course of that day. The Confederates lost about 10,700 men, and Union losses numbered some 12,400. In both cases, the losses constituted a quarter of the troops who were engaged. David L. Thompson was a soldier assigned to the 9th New York Volunteer Regiment and provided a vivid description of his experience on the far side of Antietam Creek after General Burnside's attack had seized and gotten across that stone bridge. And Thompson wrote, right across our front, 200 feet or so away, ran a country road bordered on each side by a fence. Beyond the road stretched a plowed field several hundred feet in length, sloping up to the Confederate battery, which had been hidden in a cornfield. A stone fence, chest high, enclosed the field on the left, and behind it lay a regiment of Confederates who would be directly on our flank if we should attempt to take that slope. The prospect was far from encouraging, but the order came to get ready for the attempt. At the word, a rush was made, and we lay down among the furrows of the plowed field to reform, doing so by crawling up into line. The battery, that is the Confederate battery, which at first had not seemed to notice us, apprised of its danger, opened fire on us. We were getting ready now for the charge proper, but still lying in the plowed field on our faces. Thompson was particularly impressed by how the regiment's officers behaved under fire. He was also amazed by the random way that death appeared on the battlefield. And he wrote, Lieutenant Colonel Kimball, our battalion commander, was walking up and down the line, ignoring the danger. I remember looking behind and seeing an officer riding across the field, instinctively bending his head down over his horse's neck as though we were riding through driving rain. While my eye was on him, I saw between me and him a rolled overcoat with its straps bound into the air and fall among the furrows. One of the enemy's grape shot had plowed a groove in the skull of a young fellow and cut his overcoat from his shoulders. He never stirred from his position, but he lay there face down. The moments dragged, and I heard a man cursing a comrade for lying on him too heavily. In fact, he was cursing a dead man. As the range grew better, the firing became more rapid. That is, as the Confederate artillery battery began to range in on these troops who were laying in the plowed field, the situation was desperate and exasperating to the last degree. The order to charge came, and I remember that as we rose and started, all the fire that had been held back so long was loosed by the Confederates. In a second, the air was full of the hiss of bullets and grape shot. We continued to lay there till dark. During that hour, we had time to speculate on many things. When bullets are whacking against tree trunks and solid shot are cracking skulls like eggshells, the consuming passion of the average man is to get out of the way. Between the physical fear and the moral fear of turning back, there's a predicament of exceptional awkwardness. Private Thompson was captured later in the day and marched into Virginia before he was taken by train to Libby Prison in Richmond. A man named Charles Coffin was a correspondent, a civilian correspondent traveling with the Union Army, who described his impression of the battlefield later in the day. And he wrote, with the falling back of the Confederates, I went up to the Sunken Road. Sunken Road is located in the middle of the battlefield. The Confederates had gone down as the grass falls before the sigh. Words are inadequate to portray the scene. Resolution and energy still lingered in the pallid cheeks and the set teeth in the gripping hand. I recall a Confederate soldier with the cartridge between his thumb and finger, the end of the cartridge bitten off and the paper between his teeth, where the bullet had pierced his heart. And the machinery of life, all the muscles and the nerves, had come to a permanent standstill. A young lieutenant had fallen while trying to rally his men, his hand still firmly grasping his sword. Determination was visible, every line of his face. I counted 14 bodies lying together, literally in a heap, amid the corn rows on the hillside. The broad green leaves of the corn were sprinkled and stained with blood. Nurse Clara Barton, founder of the American Red Cross, worked with the wounded during that battle, and she later wrote, "A man lying on the ground asked for a drink. I stopped to give it, and having raised him with my right hand, I was holding him, and just at that moment, a bullet passed between us, tearing a hole in my sleeve and went into his body, and he fell back dead. There was no more that I could do for him, and I have never mended that hole in my sleeve." The patient endurance of these men was most astonishing. Just outside the door of a barn lay a man wounded in the face, a rifle ball having entered his lower jaw on the left side and lodged among the bones of his right cheek. His imploring look drew me to him when, placing his fingers upon the sharp protuberance on his right cheek, he said, "Lady, will you tell me what is this that burns so much?" I replied that it must be the rifle ball, which had been too far spent to cut its way entirely through his face. "It's terribly painful," he said. "Won't you cut it out?" I had never cut into human flesh, and I said I could not hurt him so much, but he looked up, saying, "You cannot hurt me, dear lady. I can endure any pain that your hands can create. Please do it. It will relieve me so much." Clara Barton continued to write, "I do not think a surgeon would have pronounced it a scientific operation, but that it was successful, I dare to hope, from the gratitude of that soldier." With his back to the Potomac River and a single deep and rocky ford to support a retreat, General Lee kept his position the following day. After inviting a continuation of the federal attack that did not materialize, he then moved his army back into Virginia. Although the first invasion of the North had failed, this incursion into the state of Maryland may have failed in its ultimate strategic goal, but it certainly got the attention of President Lincoln and the federal government in Washington, D.C. The Army of Northern Virginia remained intact. General McClellan did not pursue, and President Lincoln relieved him for failing to press the invader. Lincoln had probably taken the measure of the man during the earlier Peninsula Campaign, and McClellan's failure to press General Lee during his retreat or his move back into Virginia was enough to convince the president that General McClellan was not a field commander, and thus closes the first Confederate invasion of the North. I'm still looking for comments to these presentations. Don't hesitate, and we'll enter into a conversation, and until then, God bless America.